Today's case is about the mysterious vanishing of a man and the pain that it has caused his loved ones. Something exciting was getting ready to happen in his life, which makes his disappearance even more mysterious. But could that also be a clue as to why he disappeared? Let's talk about Henry Moreno. Henry Arthur Moreno was from a tight-knit family from Sacramento that consisted of loving parents Rosendo and Rosa Moreno, along with his 11 siblings. Henry Moreno was 46 years old and twice divorced, but had amicable relationships with both of his exes. He also had a 16-year-old daughter named Karen, who was the light of his life. Henry Moreno was the first in his family to graduate college. He had received a bachelor's degree in history from California State University at Sacramento. He taught at McClatchy High School in Sacramento for a while, but then stepped in to help his sister Rose out during her divorce. He helped her run the bail bond agency that her and her ex-husband had owned. Henry realized that running that type of business was not for him, so he came up with another idea that he was passionate about. Henry's sister Rose purchased a dilapidated mansion in 1994 for $400,000. Her and her brother were initially going to rehab it and flip it, but about halfway through the project, Henry convinced her that the building would be the ideal location for a restaurant. The property was an oak-shaded mansion set on 1.7 lush acres on Garden Highway in Sacramento, overlooking the Sacramento River. To cut costs, Henry Moreno would do a lot of the labor himself and even made some of the furniture. This was a long, expensive project, but for Henry, it was a labor of love. During the 4 years that he would work on this project, Henry would meet and marry a Sacramento deputy sheriff named Janice. The marriage only lasted 2 years, and the couple divorced in 1996. Janice would say in a newspaper interview that Henry's work at fixing up the restaurant was definitely a factor in their divorce. She said that she needed financial security, whereas Henry liked to take risks. She said that Henry wanted that restaurant. It was all that he talked about. The expenses that come with turning a dilapidated mansion into a swanky restaurant was something that Henry Moreno didn't fully realize. Since the restaurant was so close to the water, it meant a lot of government inspections and requirements. 4 years later, by the summer of 1998, Rose Moreno had sunk a total of $700,000 into this business opportunity. She had sold property, taken out loans, and depleted her savings, all to help fund it. She told her brother that was it. She had no more money to give. Still wanting to make his dream a reality, in July of 1998, Henry found 2 much-needed investors. They would give him $200,000 cash in exchange for 30% of the business. He set the grand opening for early August. He would just need to get a new septic tank cover and then finish up a few more last-minute things, and then the restaurant, called La Mansion del Rio, located at 2125 Garden Highway in Sacramento, would soon be opening. As you can imagine, the final days before the grand opening were chaotic. Henry Moreno was excited and nervous, but was also described as tense and preoccupied. He was scrambling to tie up any loose ends in hopes of making the grand opening perfect. On Thursday morning, August 6, 1998, Henry left in his white 1997 Nissan Pathfinder, California license 3VL-P084, to run some errands in Cortland, a town near Sacramento. Around 11 a.m., Henry went to Calfund Manufacturing at 1210 River Road to pick up the septic tank cover for the restaurant. The owner of the company, Jerry Adams, said that when Moreno arrived, it was discovered that the part wasn't ready yet. Henry told them he would return later, but he never did. On Thursday night, when Henry failed to show up for an appointment he had, his family and friends didn't know what to think. This was definitely out of character, as Henry was about to reap the rewards of years of hard work, so where was he? Not really sure what to do next, the family called the police that night to report Henry Moreno as missing. It was only 3 days before the grand opening of his restaurant. The disappearance was covered in the media, and some sightings of Moreno were initially reported. Authorities searched local waterways, but Henry's family would also organize searches involving volunteers. They would walk along levees, drive down country roads, and use their motorboats to look for the missing restaurateur. But all of their searches were unsuccessful. The family was very grateful for all the volunteers who came out to help search for their brother. They were completely frustrated, though, at not knowing what could have happened to him. Then on Sunday, August 9, 1998, a day that Henry Moreno had anticipated for years, would sadly happen without him. The investors and Henry's family made the difficult decision to go ahead with the reception to introduce the new restaurant to the community. It was said that hundreds of guests showed up at the grand opening and sampled the menu, as well as their choice of 50 different tequilas, while a mariachi band performed. Everything seemed to run smoothly, and the only thing the guests questioned was, where was the owner? The family compared it to a party where the guest of honor was missing. In spite of the grand opening going well, sadly, the restaurant would never reopen under Henry Moreno's ownership. Then, with no sight of Henry, just a little over a month after his disappearance, his family came to a heartbreaking decision. With pressure to make huge mortgage payments on a business that wasn't even open, they would have to sell the restaurant. They did speak with Henry's 16-year-old daughter Karen to try and help her understand. She was devastated with her dad's dream going down the drain. She had helped her father every weekend with the renovations, and this was a visual representation of her father's dream. The 5,000 square foot mansion restaurant would be put on the market for $1.45 million. Henry's minority partners in the restaurant hadn't given up the dream of the restaurant. They had hoped that they could regroup and open it under a new landlord. Meanwhile, this project had cost his sister Rose Moreno almost everything she had. She was now dealing with the restaurant's bills and creditors while she waited for the restaurant to sell. A new headache would soon pop up concerning the fallout of the restaurant not opening as planned. In a Sacramento Bee article from 1998, it states that 75 workers who had been hired at La Mansion del Rio and were being trained and worked at the grand opening on August 9th still had not been paid. The workers believed that the two investors, Sylvester York and Wayne Young, should come up with their back wages. They didn't think that they were responsible, citing that they were silent partners. The workers had started to file for back wages and unemployment, and now the California Labor Commission was taking a closer look. The restaurant never opening was a distraction for them, but the Moreno family was still at a loss to figure out why their brother was gone and where he could be. The fact that he worked so long and hard to get this restaurant ready to open and would vanish right before it did tells them that he didn't just leave by choice. When they first heard he was missing, they thought they'd find their brother soon after, stranded on the side of the road, perhaps with car trouble, or maybe his back had gone out again. He had a history of back problems. But with all the countless searches and efforts in finding out information, not even a clue has emerged as to where he could be. The family even spent $10,000 on private detectives and hired mediums in their quest for answers. But nothing seemed to help further the case. There was a lot of newspaper coverage for this disappearance in the Sacramento Bee. With the help of reporters and police investigations, they were able to piece together a few more details about the last day Henry Moreno was seen. His first stop in Cortland, as far as anyone knows, was to check on his septic tank lid that I'd mentioned earlier. Then he went to the 524 Mexican restaurant on Northgate Boulevard for lunch. He would usually go there for lunch about twice a week. The waitress, Maria Gomez, remembers that day. She said that Henry arrived around 11:15 a.m. He had an invitation for his grand opening to hand deliver to the owner, but he wasn't there. She said that Moreno was in a good mood and seemed happy and excited about the grand opening. She said that he finished his lunch, left the invitation with her, paid his bill, and left around 11:45 a.m. That is the last confirmed sighting of him. There is another sighting, and although we don't know if it's accurate, if it is, it's certainly interesting. This doesn't appear to be a confirmed sighting, but if it did actually happen, it would be the latest sighting, and some of what was reportedly seen are confusing at best. The sighting was at the Home Depot on Truxell Road. The sighting was that Henry Moreno was seen in the lumber department with an unknown well-dressed African-American man. It is not known if Moreno would have had any reason to be there, who the mystery man was, or if this sighting even really happened. Despite the majority of the people who had very positive things to say about Henry Moreno and absolutely insisted that he would not have left willingly, this disappearance would also have its detractors. Rumors abounded that referenced his financial difficulties with the restaurant, implying that he left on purpose. There were also some flyers mysteriously posted around downtown Sacramento in late 1998. They actually mocked Henry Moreno's disappearance, and the reward listed for information says it was a sarsaparilla. The family couldn't believe how cruel it was that those would be displayed, or who would have gone to those lengths. There was someone else who would weigh in for a Sacramento Bee article, and they had nothing good to say about the missing man. This person was Leonard Padilla, and he was the ex-husband of Henry Moreno's sister Rose. He had originally owned the bail bonds company with his wife that Henry had stepped in to help his sister run. Leonard Padilla was described as a colorful and controversial bounty hunter who had once served time in prison for failing to pay taxes. Leonard and Rose had gone through a bitter divorce several years earlier. Padilla's comments about his missing former brother-in-law were blunt and unkind. He was not this good guy that's been painted by the media, Padilla said. Then he believes Moreno simply left town because of the financial stress, leaving his sister behind to clean up the mess. He said that Henry worked in the bail bond business. He knew how to disappear. He also described him as a scam artist and a charismatic dreamer who likely is living the good life somewhere outside of California. Padilla goes on to claim, "He ain't dead. I could prove it, but why should I? If his family wants to put up a substantial sum of money, say $100,000, I would either prove he's alive or, if by some chance he was killed, find out who did it." The Morenos would give their thoughts on Padilla's comments. They said that they were tapped out financially and emotionally, and said that they wanted nothing to do with Leonard Padilla. Henry's sister Martha said that Leonard was Henry's arch-enemy, and he has taunted the Moreno family and tainted Henry's good name. Another business associate of Moreno, who didn't want to be named, would agree with part of Padilla's theory. He said that he felt sorry for Moreno's family because it must be awful, but that he really thinks that Henry is off in Mexico somewhere. There was also an anonymous tip reported to police in 2003 that Henry Moreno was alive and living in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. Sacramento police did contact Mexican officials, but they weren't able to substantiate anything. In a newspaper article from 2005, a childhood friend of Henry's named Terry Flynn had an interesting conversation with him about a month before he disappeared. Flynn, who was a Sacramento bank vice president, recalls that Henry Moreno was very proud of the restaurant. Given what happened not long after this meeting, Henry Moreno's words are haunting, given that he would soon disappear. He told his friend that he was lacking a little capital, but that he wasn't worried. He said, "I'm going to talk to some guys. I have a plan. I'm going to take care of it." Is Henry Moreno's way of handling it why he is now missing? The family tried desperately to keep Henry's disappearance in the news and continued to speak with the media to garner attention so that their loved one would not be forgotten. They at first were pleased with the attention that law enforcement was giving Henry's disappearance, but as the years went by, they were frustrated at the lack of support. Police responded that they had investigated all leads. There were just no current leads to follow up on. The family compared their loved one's case to the Natalie Holloway disappearance, which had just happened. They mentioned all the media attention and funds that were being dedicated to the case. Their question was simple: where's the support for Henry? A few years later, Henry Moreno's beloved restaurant would reopen under new ownership and a new name. It was now called Bridges on the River. As you can imagine, it was painful for the family to see the restaurant and remember their missing loved one and the dreams he had for that property. Although still close-knit, the disappearance did take its toll on the Moreno family over the years. Some of the family wanted to continue the search, while others just wanted to put this incredibly painful chapter behind them. The family would hold a yearly vigil at East Portal Park on the anniversary of the disappearance, but they saw how difficult it was on the Moreno's parents, so they stopped. The family has since planted an oak tree at the park, and there is a commemorative plaque near it honoring their lost brother. Sadly, Henry Moreno's parents are both now gone. Rosa Moreno died in 2012 at the age of 88, and Rosendo Moreno died in 2018 at the age of 98. Until their death, they were both still grieving for their lost boy, whom they had mourned for the last 2 decades of their life. Mario Moreno doesn't want his brother to be forgotten. In an article on the 20th anniversary of his disappearance, he said, "I would like people to know that my brother was a stand-up member of the family, probably the best of the family. Whenever anything happened in the family, we all went to him for help and advice, so he is greatly missed." He also says that he thinks his brother got stuck in a bad situation. He was heavily in debt at the time of his disappearance. He said that the family expects to find out the truth someday, but they doubt they'll ever see him alive again. I did want to mention that I first learned about this disappearance during a recent video posted by Adventures with Purpose. They were in the area working on another case and did a search for Henry Moreno's car in some waterways around Sacramento. Unfortunately, they did not find anything concerning this case. Now, as for my thoughts on this disappearance, I will break this down into 5 separate possibilities. The first possibility is that Henry Moreno disappeared because he wanted to. Was the extreme stress and financial hardship he had been under taking its toll, and did he just need to leave the situation? I don't believe so. Granted, it was a stressful period of time for Henry, but that was all hopefully coming to a close. It appeared that the worst was behind him. Henry seemed determined to make this investment a success. Plus, he was devoted to his family, and his sister Rose had basically sunk her entire life savings into his project. So to leave willingly would mean to leave his sister and his other family members, who had also invested in the restaurant, holding the bag and putting them in a terrible financial situation. No matter how stressful it was for the last 4 years, I just don't see Henry Moreno doing that to a family that he clearly loved. The second possibility is, could he have ended his life purposely? I don't see any scenario where Henry would have wanted to take his life. He was very close to his large family and a very devoted father to his young daughter. Everything was on an upswing, and by all accounts, he was excited and happy for the future, so ending it all before his journey running the restaurant even began makes no sense to me. The third possibility is that Henry Moreno accidentally drove into the water or had some other type of tragic accident where he just hasn't been located. There were a lot of bodies of water near where he was traveling, but a few things give me pause about that. He was very familiar with the area, and when he disappeared, it was daylight. It would be hard to imagine how he could accidentally drive into the water unless he had suffered some sort of medical emergency, which is definitely possible. But I do think if his car is in the water, that might better explain why there has been absolutely no trace of him or his car in the past 27 years. Now, the fourth possibility was that Henry Moreno met with foul play, considering some people that he may have owed money to. There have been rumors in this case blaming the Mexican mafia for the disappearance, but there are no specifics as to why. I do think that Henry Moreno was getting desperate to get the funding to finish the restaurant. He had already acquired 2 partners and therefore had to give up part ownership. Now that it was the last push and he had a deadline to meet, perhaps Henry Moreno sought money from someone he wouldn't have normally dealt with. His words to his friend just a few weeks before he vanished concerning needing more money are haunting to me. Remember, Moreno said, "I'm going to talk to some guys. I have a plan. I'm going to take care of it." Was he willing to take money from a dangerous source to finish funding his restaurant? The problem with that scenario was the timing. If he had acquired some money last minute, why would Henry Moreno have been taken out before the restaurant even opened? It would benefit anyone who loaned him money to let him open the restaurant and hope that it made money and that their loan could be paid back without taking it a step further. Unless part of Moreno's errands that day included meeting with someone about a loan, or perhaps he owed money on a past due loan, and there was a dispute, and he then met with foul play. I will add my thoughts on the supposed second sighting of Henry at the home improvement store. I don't think that an unknown man with Henry would have been surprising, considering he probably had employed many workers during the renovation process. However, the restaurant was just a few days before officially opening, so I don't believe he would have had any reason to be in the lumber department of a Home Depot. Henry didn't have any features that would necessarily stand out. He was a slim, tall, middle-aged Hispanic man with dark hair and a mustache, and I'm sure that many men would have fit that description. I think it's more likely that it was not a legitimate sighting of him, just someone who may have resembled him. Now, the 5th and last possibility is whether or not Leonard Padilla was involved in Henry's disappearance. Something that Henry's sister Martha said caught my attention. She referred to Henry and Padilla as arch-enemies, which to me makes it sound like there was a strong and pure dislike or even hatred between the two that probably wasn't just concerning one issue. First, we have the fact that Padilla was no longer a part of the Moreno family and that Henry helped his sister during this bitter divorce. That in itself is noteworthy. But this bitter divorce also caused Rose Moreno to gain ownership of the bail bonds company, and considering that Leonard Padilla was described as a bounty hunter, I'm sure that created a lot of bitterness for Padilla towards Henry, as Mario Moreno said that Henry took over running it, which in essence means that Henry took over Padilla's job. I would imagine that caused a lot of animosity for Leonard Padilla towards Henry Moreno. When Leonard Padilla found out that Henry Moreno had gone missing, he didn't just keep quiet and maybe even privately thought to himself that Henry got what he deserved. He didn't even act ambivalent about his former brother-in-law's disappearance. He took it a step further. He made a point to talk to the media and anyone that would listen to tell them what a lousy person that he thought Henry Moreno was. To not have any compassion concerning someone who is missing and the reason why being unknown is cold, but to not take into consideration what his family was going through, a family that he was once a part of, and to take it a step further and say terrible things about him could be viewed as downright suspicious. Padilla didn't have to say anything to anyone about Moreno's disappearance, yet he chose to. I also wouldn't put it past Padilla to be behind the fake missing posters that were found in downtown Sacramento. They were used to mock Moreno's disappearance, and that is basically what Padilla did in his newspaper interviews. Although there is no evidence, I certainly can't rule out that Padilla could have had something to do with Moreno's disappearance. He had more of a vendetta against him than anyone else that we know about, so if Henry Moreno did meet with foul play, Leonard Padilla should be on the short list of suspects. Part of the reason why is his inability to keep his mouth shut about a tragic disappearance. He deserves any backlash that he received about his comments, but I doubt that he cares. I will add that Leonard Padilla seems to crave and welcome controversy, so that may have been a factor in him trying to get attention for himself when his former brother-in-law vanished. He could have an entire podcast episode devoted to his exploits, but I don't want to waste my time on him. Let's just say, to sum his character up, that he was the one who posted Casey Anthony's bond in 2008 instead of just letting her rot in jail after being accused of murdering her child. Enough said. So to sum it up, there is no clear-cut theory here. I go between some sort of a tragic accident where Henry Moreno and his car ended up in the water, or he met with foul play concerning some people he had borrowed money from regarding the restaurant. That's one of the reasons that this is such a baffling disappearance, especially considering the timing of it. There is no clear-cut answer or reason why. In my research, I also came across another missing restaurateur that was several years later, but he lived only 18 miles from Sacramento, where Henry Moreno went missing from. So let's talk about his disappearance. Stephen Clark Peace was 57 years old and owned a restaurant called Sammy's Rockin' Island Bar and Grill on 238 Vernon Street in Roseville, California, which is a suburb of Sacramento. He licensed the name of the restaurant from rock singer Sammy Hagar, who is a California native. In fact, on September 15, 2012, the day the restaurant opened its doors, the city declared it Sammy Hagar Day that featured a concert and street party where Hagar and his band performed. It appears that he was last seen by anyone who knew him on Halloween. Around that time, he had told his ex-wife that he needed to clear his head. He reportedly had some business dealings in Portland on November 1st. On November 2nd, he checked into a hotel at Fort Bragg. He would check out of the hotel on November 3rd, 2013, and was then due to turn in the rental car on November 5th, 2013. He did not return it then, and after family and friends didn't hear from Peace, they reported him missing. Authorities were able to access the rental car's OnStar navigation and tracking system as it was turned on. However, they were not able to acquire a signal. This didn't necessarily indicate the car was inoperable, as it could be as simple as being in a remote area or perhaps in a parking garage. They also accessed P's email account and sent all of his contacts an email talking about his disappearance and asking anyone with information to contact them. In addition, they would mail every business within a 50-mile radius of Fort Bragg a missing poster with Peace's information on it. A week after Steve Peace was last seen, some information was revealed that some say could be a clue to his disappearance. The Roseville Community Development Corporation, referred to as RCDC, announced on November 10th that Peace was in default of a loan that had been given to him and his business partner. The corporation had given them a $1.5 million loan in February of 2012 as part of their efforts to revitalize downtown Roseville. A week after he disappeared, the restaurant would close its doors, which would mean they certainly would not be receiving payments towards their loan for the immediate future. The first installment on the loan in the amount of $9,165.45 was due in September of 2013 and was made. However, the one that was due on October 22nd was not made. Steve Peace would then disappear on November 3rd of the same year. That led some to speculate that he left due to financial issues. His friends were quick to dismiss this theory, however. Peace's friend Chris Madrew was interviewed in an article in the Sacramento Bee concerning his disappearance. He stated that some people think he could have taken the money owed for the October installment and ran with it, but that didn't make sense to him. He likened that to Peace stealing his own money. Others pointed out that one missed payment wasn't the end of the world. Madrew started that Peace had 5 businesses and plenty of assets. He had a house that had recently been listed for sale, as well as a $70,000 Rolls-Royce still in the garage. They believed if Steve Peace fled willingly, it wasn't due to a financial concern. He then referenced the comment that Peace made to his ex-wife before he disappeared, that he needed to clear his head. So the question is his disappearance an accident, a crime, or did he walk away from his life willingly? Steve Peace's business partner, John Yip, was tight-lipped during this disappearance. He did not speak to the media or the RCDC who had given them the loan. The organization was anxious to open the restaurant back up so it could start making revenue. They believed the improvements used with some of the loan money would benefit the new owners if the building had to be sold. But the restaurant couldn't afford to stay closed or in limbo, and it just needed one thing to reopen, and that is to find its owner. Then on Saturday, November 23rd, less than 1 month after he was reported missing, recreational divers would find a body floating in the Pacific Ocean near Gualala. There were steep cliffs around that prevented rescuers from retrieving the body and carrying it to safety, so they would attach it to a helicopter that would then transport it to a nearby field. The body had appeared to be in the water for several days, and there was no identification found. However, when the Mendocino County coroner completed a forensic autopsy, a check of serial numbers on the hip implants of the remains quickly revealed who the unidentified person was. Sadly, Steve Pease had now been found. Even though Steve Pease was no longer missing, the mystery around his disappearance wasn't solved. His body was found roughly 60 miles from Fort Bragg, where he was last known to be. He was found roughly 180 miles from Sacramento. His rental car, a silver Chevrolet Captiva SUV, was not found with or near his remains. Authorities then restarted their search for the car, employing helicopters to survey the area near where the restaurateur was found. Upon hearing the news, rocker Sammy Hagar would weigh in, saying, "I'm utterly saddened by the news of the passing of Steve Peace. My family and I send our prayers and deepest condolences to his friends and family during the upcoming holiday season and beyond." His friend Chris Madrew, who worked diligently in the search for his friend, would also say, "Our worst fears were realized. Steve was an incredible person that touched the lives of so many people. He was a kind, caring, compassionate man." Steve Pease and his business partner, John Yip, opened a company called Innova Restaurant Concepts, LLC, when they initially purchased the restaurant. Pease also operated a rental agency for 3 downtown properties. Tenants were making their monthly payments and foot traffic was good, so everything was running smoothly with that. Searches would continue for months for the SUV in hopes that it would hold some clues as to what happened to Pease. Meanwhile, a memorial service was held for Steve Pease on January 18, 2014, at the Roseville Theater on the same street in Roseville where his restaurant was located. His family would say that it was not a funeral, but a celebration of life service to honor a great man. They encouraged everyone to wear bright clothes, which Steve loved. The restaurant would also reopen in the fall of 2014 to everyone's excitement. As far as who would be running it, well, that might surprise you. The RCDC would take ownership of the business since Pease and his business partner had defaulted on the loan. Although he had never actually had any ownership in the business prior, Sammy Hagar, then 66, decided that he would lease the restaurant. Sammy was said to be taking a hands-on approach to managing it and would perform there from time to time. The Hagars, Sammy and his 2 sons, Aaron and Andrew, signed a 3-year lease. Sammy would reunite with the surviving members of the 1970s band Montrose that he started his career with for a concert on September 13, 2014 for the grand opening. Unfortunately, the Hagars' venture didn't work out like they had hoped. They announced its closure in February of 2015, just 5 months after its reopening, citing that the restaurant wasn't making a profit. There was never a definitive cause of death able to be determined for Steve Pease. As far as I could tell, the rental car has never been found. In this case, his recovery was just as baffling as the disappearance, maybe even more so. As far as my thoughts on the disappearance, given on what we know anyway, I think it's most likely that Pease disappeared by choice and did end his life. He had confided to his ex he needed to clear his head, and then right after leaves and breaks contact with family and friends, and shortly after is found in the water. That could also be a reason why he chose to rent a rental car and not take his Rolls Royce or any other vehicle he may have had. It is stated that he had some shaky financial situations going on, but there could have been a lot of other things going on in his head and struggles that no one knew about. I do find it strange that as far as I know, the rental car has never been found. I'm unsure if Steve Peace could have entered the water in the car and then emerged from it and floated away, and that's why they weren't found together. With all of the aerial searches for the helicopter near where he was found, I think it's more likely that the SUV rental is in the water somewhere. That might also explain that even though the OnStar system was turned on, it was never able to be accessed. This is such a sad case of a man who was clearly loved and had a wide circle of people who cared about him. Whether or not he chose to end his own life or died in a tragic accident does not change the loss of his death was to his family and friends. More than 25 years later, and the disappearance of Henry Moreno is as cold as it was soon after he disappeared. Detective Crosby of the Sacramento PD said the last tip in the case was back in 2016 and nothing came of it. It is so important to bring attention to these lesser-known cases and to keep talking about them. They can still be solved. Henry and his car can be found, and the Morenos deserve to have their questions answered about what happened to their loved one. Mario Moreno said it best. We don't want to forget our brother. We don't want our brother to be forgotten. It would just take that one tip or for someone to find the missing car, and maybe then we will learn more about how Henry Moreno went from grand opening to gone. That concludes my podcast on Henry Moreno. If you enjoyed it, please leave me a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find me at Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio under one word, Lost and Found Podcast. You can also read all of my original articles, as well as links to my most recent podcasts, on my website at Lost and Found Blogs. I have social media accounts under my website name at Facebook, X, and Instagram. You can reach me via email at lostandfoundpodcast@yahoo. And remember that cold cases stay cold because their story stops getting told.